Welcome to the Village podcast. I am your host, Nicole Trumfio. My why has always been to empower women and amplify the voices of mothers. We created the Village to share stories and ideas to embody the innate wisdom of a village, but on a modern day platform. I hope this podcast inspires, educates, and informs you and brings you the joy, love, and light you deserve. Welcome to the Village. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Berlin to our podcast today. This is a topic that is really something that I am personally very curious about. I think a lot of us as women, it's subjects that we really don't touch on enough. Just all of the things that can go on with your body, your mental, spiritual, and physical, while you're pregnant and during postpartum. So welcome to the Village podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here and already just music to my ears because I wish I could get people to sign on for, preparing for postpartum during pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And I hope that you and I are going to be able to create some really meaningful change around that because that is a game changer right there.
Absolutely. I wonder, just talking to friends amongst peers, I'm like, how is there not some kind of handbook or guidebook that it's necessary to read it before?
Totally.
I think a lot of us go into it. I certainly went into it saying I have a good head on my shoulders and I'm mature and I'm athletic and this is going to be a breeze.
Right.
And a lot of friends that have gone in that way too are very, surprised by the outcome. So we're here to talk about that today to hopefully prepare our listeners and our community of all the things that may or may not happen. It's informing our community so that they have the tools if they do experience something and they know how to go out and get support. So let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
So how did you find your passion? What lit the fire inside of you?
And it's interesting because I don't think my story is very unique. I think that a lot of people, as you move into this phase of life and you're getting ready to start a family, you step in and you do. And then it was all of a sudden oh my gosh, how is there nothing, right? How is there nothing to support you? How is it just you're letting me leave, with this baby, assuming that you had a hospital birth? And it's oh my gosh, and my background was in women's health. So I had done a lot of work in eating disorders and body image, but always had a mindset towards wanting to help women.
Yeah.
And then it was, we had our first and it was Armageddon, it is for so many people.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Elliot, there's got to be more out there. This is just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, again, pretty common for a lot of people, couldn't really see doing much past taking care of this one person. And it wasn't until after our second one was born that I said, there isn't, or I don't know what's out there, but I'm going to find it and I'm going to create it.
Right. Okay.
And so, And so that's where, it's interesting because as you were talking about, how is there no manual? How is there no book that we have to read? I'm what's even more frustrating? I agree. And I made it. I created a workshop to help couples transition to that parenthood. But it's still so hard to get people to tap into and to want to spend time on during the bliss of pregnancy.
Absolutely. And also just even knowing about what you created, right, which is what we're providing to our community today, is finding that resource. So you had your own kind of journey with getting pregnant, mm-hmm, and but when you were going through that, at what stage were you at with your transition into your career?
So that's a great question. It took Elliot and I a long time to get pregnant. We actually did a huge parlay into the world of infertility before we actually had our first. And gratefully, when it was right, things just happened and flowed. But I was done with graduate school. I was pregnant with my first during my postdoctorate training. Mm-hmm. I remember, Yosef at the time was this cute little toddler, hopping around and taking my licensing exam study materials and throwing it on the floor because he's no more studying, mommy. I want your attention now, right?
Yeah.
But they happened pretty, concurrent with each other.
And you were studying for Psychology?
Yeah, at the time I was studying for my California state licensing exam. So I had finished all of my schooling.
Yeah.
I had finished all of my practical hours. You know, now it was like, let's get licensed and get out there. Yes, it's funny.
So at that point, you didn't know you were going to go into perinatal psychology?
No.
What did you think you were going to do?
At the time, I thought I was going to do more transitionary work, helping people through life's transitions. Yeah. So it wasn't such a leap. It just had more of a focus.
I mean, this is in itself like a huge transition. It's a rebirth.
Yeah.
So at this point, when you were going through this journey with fertility, how was that affecting your psyche?
It was such a painful and difficult time in our lives. You know, it was a lot of, I think anyone who hasn't gone into the fertility world is not ready for the roller coaster of, you know, the highs and the lows and the riding the different steps along the way. Like it has become, I'm a poster child for any client who, let's say, is going through IVF. Yeah. For me to like walk them through and, hey, I just want you to know, right? You get this wonderful number after the egg retrieval. But now let me walk you through what that process really looks like, because people aren't prepared for the attrition. You start with, let's say, 15 eggs. How many become embryos? How many become, you know, viable or whatever it is? And if you don't know those steps along the way, it just can become devastating. Yeah. And I remember just riding those highs and those lows so closely and so painfully. Elliot and I did a great job of investing in the relationship. So I'm really proud about that. You know, we were both in graduate school at the same time, both starting our careers at the same time. And so we would take a lot of classes together. Yeah. Pottery, painting, cake decorating. Yes.
Is that the secret? Because you guys have an awesome relationship.
Thank you. Yes, dating should never stop.
I love that. I agree, by the way.
Yeah.
Did your care provider let you know about this before you went into no. So you were experiencing it as... Yeah.
Pretty much on our own. There were a lot of like big promises at the beginning. You're young. It'll be easy. No problem. And then when it didn't, you know, come out that way, again, it's just a devastation. And it's a hard world, you know, something that I'm sure we can spend a lot of time talking about, because there's so much that we can do to test sperm, right? We could test, you know, sperm and rule out or rule in if there's something or, you know, going on or not. After that, we're really at a loss. And so by default, it's like, oh, well, it must be an egg problem. And for any woman to hear that, it's like, yeah. You know, I hear it when, unfortunately, you know, miscarriage or stillbirth or anything. It's like we feel so much responsibility because it's my body. Yeah. Right. And it's my body either in my mind doing what it is supposed to do or not. You know, and so therefore we feel personally responsible. The reality is that no one controls their body, right? I don't decide when I'm going to sweat, when I'm going to, you know, shiver, when I'm going to breathe, right? Yeah. And yet somehow when it comes to this, it's like, well, my fault, my responsibility.
Interesting. I remember when I had my first miscarriage, and I remember going, it's so silly, but I remember going to stay at this hotel, and I had my doctor appointment the next day, and the hotel had some kind of party going on, and the music was so loud. And I was like, I think I turned on like classical music to try and like counteract it. And I remember feeling like the next day when I found out I had a miscarriage, was it because of the music? Like, you just don't know. And that's such a naive thing to think. But I was like, oh my God, or I was emotional if I was hormonal and I had a fight with my husband or something. It's like, I should have been more calm. Totally. And you think that it's your fault on so many levels. It's the biggest feeling of guilt. And I would never told anyone for years. And then when I told somebody, they're like, oh yeah, I've had 10. Oh yeah, I've had 8. Oh yeah, I've had so many. And I was like, wait, what?
The world of miscarriage or infertility or fertility treatment, it's like this super secret club that no one wants to be a part of. But when life kind of serves you or you experience certain things, and as soon as you do open that door, the world comes and surrounds you and hugs you and envelops you, because it is so much more common than we realize.
For sure.
And then it's creating that space to come to these perspectives on our own, right? Like, it's so beautiful that you're able to see it in that way and appreciate the beauty of your body that said, hey, if this wasn't going to result in a healthy, vibrant child. I'm so happy that my body can be in that mode where it can do that. And it's creating that space for everyone to come to that perspective or that place on their own. And that, and just finding what they need.
Absolutely.
And never letting insight and understanding shorthand or take the place of the emotion. Because I can understand that cognitively. And in the meantime, my body might be struggling. Because we know that it's big and it's powerful. And, just creating that space for everyone to have their own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I like when you talk to aunties or uncles or, the older generation, they are sometimes sharing that secret that they've never, ever shared.
Yes. Or even parents, by the way, moms.
Yeah. And I'm like, wow, you've been holding that your entire life. And now this generation, we're talking about it.
Right.
And so they are actually finding these moments to free their secrets, which they're like, oh my gosh, it's actually normal. And I've been holding on to this for my entire life.
That's right.
And maybe holding guilt. And that's like really sad.
Yeah.
And I hope that it's now freeing. And that's the reason why we're here today. Doing this podcast is really to normalize everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
And that's why it's so amazing that you're doing that, right? Because you're creating permission to talk about it and creating healing in generations that pass that, like you said, have felt this need to hold on to what has felt like a deep, dark secret.
For sure.
That now we can share and be open and receive each other.
Yeah.
And then, opening up that conversation for people now and as it's happening now, that you don't have to go this alone.
Yeah.
Right? There are so many people out there who get it and understand and can be in the trenches with you. It's interesting because we talk about like misery loves company, and not to say anyone's miserable and everyone gets to decide, but it's only slightly correct. The reality is that misery loves miserable company. And we need to find a better play on words, but that idea that we appreciate the company of people who have been there and who get it because they've walked that walk. That's a whole different level of company. Right? So not the person who's never had that struggle that says, oh, I'm so sorry and I'm here for you, which is lovely. But then to hear that from someone who's literally been there, you're like, wow, you can really understand my heart on a different level. Right? And that's where support groups are so massive.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever spoken at a Mommy and Me group where there isn't this like audible sigh of relief when you hear that mom be like, oh, it's normal? Oh, you did too? Right? Like that is just the most cathartic thing.
It really is.
It's wild.
And it's a collective thing that, being a mother is such an isolating thing. I was saying to my husband, it's like, we're set up for failure. We should be living in a village, which is why the podcast is called The Village. And we should be all helping each other. So everyone has some kind of relief. Everyone has some kind of support and shoulder. And it's not all the weight is not on one person.
Right.
Even to provide, I feel for men that have this weight from the moment they're born to be a provider. It's like I look at my son and I'm like, you have a weight on your shoulders already and you don't even know it yet.
Yes.
And it's like, so how can we support everybody that is making up? We're a team, right? Even as a community, we're all a team and everyone has a role. I find being pregnant so isolating, and then even leading up to childbirth and then postpartum obviously is the most. So can we talk about things that can happen with a woman while she's pregnant psychologically?
Sure. And I love that you're doing this on so many levels. And it's such a pet peeve of mine when people say, well, we've lost the village. So like, oh, well, and they throw up their hands. I'm like, no, we didn't lose it. It changed. It's virtual now.
Yeah.
And you are leading that. So like, really, like that is such a tremendous thing that you're doing.
I hope we can touch people and just inform them.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by BUMPSUIT, the modern company redefining maternity and beyond. As a mom of 3, I've tried every single baby carrier on the market. And at BUMPSUIT, we came up with the best baby carrier out there. We took all the problems from the baby carriers we loved and we solved them in this one baby carrier called the Armadillo. The Armadillo has a lot of different pockets for your phone, your keys. It even has a space for your water bottle to hang from. It has a weather cover. It's got a back lumbar for that support, especially after giving birth. It is great for newborns up until, my 3.5-year-old still asks for it. Go to BUMPSUIT.co, that's BUMPSUIT.co, use the code THEVILLAGE20 for 20% off your entire order and get an Armadillo baby carrier. Do yourself a favor.
Pregnancy, postpartum, the word that we'll use in the field a lot is perinatal. Yes. Right? And so what is perinatal? Perinatal is from conception through that first year postpartum. And that's really that time period that we're looking at, right? And pregnancy is a huge part of that, almost half of that. I think about, perinatal and all of this as almost like, shining a spotlight on things that were before, but now they come center stage and with a different vengeance that we're not able to sidestep the way we used to. Mm-hmm. And we need to deal and address them. So pregnancy and postpartum and perinatal is a time of just change, of transition. And with that comes a lot of upheaval. For a lot of people, I find that it calls a lot of different relationships into question. And so we're examining things in a different way. Our relationship with our partner, our relationship with our own parents, right? As we're moving into that transition of I'm now about to take on that role. What do I think about that? What's my relationship? But what do I think and how do I think about what the job my parents did? And hopefully, we even get to think about a little bit of, hey, what did you do right that I loved? What did you maybe not do so incredible that I'd like to change, into this next generation? Mm-hmm. So a lot of that, it's a lot of, we know that there are major hormonal fluctuations and that can absolutely impact our mood.
Yeah.
And that's big. And I also find for a lot of individuals, it's a time that can cause old traumas to resurface. And that's kind of what I mean about shining that spotlight on old things, big or small. It could be small, like, hey, my partner always leaves the cabinet doors open. And, I always find it annoying. But, before I'm pregnant, it's like I could either like sigh or huff and close them or be like, hey, honey, if you don't mind, can we remember those cabinet doors? Mm-hmm. After pregnancy, it's like, yeah, just close those doors. I can't believe how many times am I going to tell you, right? So little things can feel big.
Yeah.
And then big things can kind of resurface. And again, it's now right here in front of us that, just needs a different level of attention or is the impetus for the first time to want to deal with certain things. I was just talking to a mom, on my way over here, and we were talking about what does it mean to do self-care, for example, and how pregnancy for a lot of people is really a time when they'll take care of themselves in a very different way. Why? Because I have this ability to say, oh, well, I'm doing it for baby. I'm still not comfortable doing it for me, but I'm doing it for baby.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to address that, right? But I'm like, great, ride that. If this is the motivation or the first time in your life that you're taking care of yourself in a different way, great.
Yeah.
So again, it's so much change and fluctuation and, everything gets called into question in a different way. If we pay attention and tap into it.
Yeah. And so, there is all of that because you become really protective when you're pregnant.
Yes.
So I noticed I would never sign up to subscriptions. I wanted to be in a small place. I wanted to nest. It's like you don't want people to be too close to you.
Yeah.
I was very like, these are the boundaries.
Right.
Which is quite primal and animalistic.
Yes.
So and I was going through the wildest emotions. I always look at that time and I'm like, how did my husband even stay with me? Like they must be equipped as well to handle this in some way, but he definitely was right there. And I wish that I had some kind of information or tools to really understand what was happening to me so that I could kind of address it or have some kind of coping mechanism for myself. So what do you do with people? Like, how do you work with people to kind of prepare them for those emotions and those, really questioning relationships. Like, what are the tools to get through this?
Totally. And I think, if I were to lean into Elliot, I think men are just so grateful to not be the one that's pregnant, that it gives them the superpower to be like, sure, honey, whatever you need, whatever you know is going on right now.
Yeah.
And I remembered with one of them in one of those like very emotional places being like, I'm so sad that you'll never get to experience this. And he's like, I'm okay. I'm good. You enjoy.
Yeah, for sure.
How to deal with it. It's so hard. And I think, you're starting it by talking about it. And the more we can create permission to speak and to limit some of that natural isolation that you talk about is huge, right? Especially women, we're verbal processors. We are social beings and we get so much from connecting with other people. And that is one of the things that I like for people to, really lean into a lot is, who can you talk to, right? Who are your people? And talk. For me, it's my sister, hands down. My older sister, Faye, like the year she moved out of the country, it rocked my world. And I didn't even understand it for a while. And then it occurred to me of like, oh, we used to speak like 12 times a day for minutes or hours or whatever it was. And I haven't had that this year because the time change was so big and so hard that I was like, wow. I didn't even realize the impact of losing that.
Yes.
And so that's a huge thing, right? Is being able to talk.
Yes.
I like to tell husbands a lot of times, like, guess what? You get to be the listener. You get to be front row as if you weren't, watching it happen, Yeah. And if she wants to talk to you over and over again, we want to help you be that listener. And it's like, feel free to, encourage her, like, hey, do you want to call Susie or talk to a friend? But if at the end of the day, they say, no, I want to talk to you, that is huge.
Yeah.
And so helping men learn, by the way, that listening is an action.
Yeah, right.
Massive, right? Yeah. That is a game changer. No, I want to help. I want to do. I want to fix.
Yes.
Listening is an action. It is a doing. It is a verb.
Yeah.
Well,
there's something really poignant that stood out with what you just said. And it's like the way that you just framed that was like you're preparing your husband first.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to you and I would love for you to listen. It's like these awarenesses,
yes,
I think are things we need to language more because it's like you don't expect anything from them. They don't need to fix them. But saying that in advance, like, I want you to live the best life, but I really just need to express this right now. And the result is going to be like, we're going to just continue on our way and hold space.
Huge. Because let's think about it. Safety, right? You talk about primal. There's no greater or more primal need than feeling safe. Mm-hmm. And if we don't feel seen and if we don't feel heard, we don't feel safe. Right. And so whereas, in that moment, your husband may have felt like, this activity he was about to do was under threat of not happening. Right. And that might have triggered him. For you, it's like, but I need that connection first. I need you to listen. I need you to hear and see me. I want you to have your thing. Like you said, I'm not looking to fuck with anything. I want you to have a great day. Mm-hmm. But that moment of connection that then allows you to feel safe.
Yes.
Is massive.
Yes.
Right? And you're so right. And so often we don't realize that the way we go about something actually works against what we're ideally wanting. Mm-hmm. And so it's in those moments that I always like people to kind of stop and think about like, well, what might be the other motive, if you will. But what we know is that I'm yet to meet the person that if someone comes at them with an axe, that they stop and they say, oh, she seems upset. I wonder what's going on for her. And they stop and listen. No, if you come at me with all of this energy, if you're having that figurative or proverbial axe in your hand, the only thing that I'm going to do is defend.
Right.
Right? Because that's going to trigger that fight or flight. And if I feel under threat, there is nothing more important than survival in that moment.
Okay, so what is a tool for a pregnant woman that is emotional to set her stage for success?
Sure. Well, I want to even first borrow what you navigated and how brilliant that is, which is we can even first just talk to the fear. And if we speak directly to the fear and everyone then can take that calm breath, well, now I have an engaged audience again, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
If we know our partner and they're worried that like, I don't know if your husband likes to golf, but if they're worried that their tea time, is under threat, if we could say, babe, I'm so happy for you to go golfing. I want you to know that's safe.
Yeah.
Right? Well, now you've already re-engaged your audience. So that's something that's huge right there. That's brilliant, you know? Something else that a lot of times I'll suggest is a formula about how to approach something. If your true goal is to get a need met, right? Well, then how can we do it in a way that doesn't, ignite defenses? And usually it has something to do with, can you say how you feel, right? I'm feeling really overwhelmed today. Can we describe what's in front of us in a neutral way, not in an antagonistic way? Because if I'm coming at you, you're going to defend or come at me. But if I could say it neutrally, like, the garbage is really piling up in the kitchen. Not, you piece of this, and I can't believe, and you have one job, and what, right? It's like, hey, by the way, I'm feeling overwhelmed. The garbage is piling up in the kitchen. And then being very real and explicit with what I'm needing or wanting. It would mean a lot to me if you could take it out before we go to bed. So something like that.
Yes.
Now, something
I
small.
I want to take out your garbage right now.
Come over anytime.
Yeah.
Right? If I can get it. No, I'm just kidding. But something like that, right? That again, what are we communicating? You're not terrible. I don't think you're a monster. Yeah. We're in this together. I'm just sharing that I have this outstanding need and something's bothering me. And you know what? Usually the response to that is, oh, babe, I didn't even know. Of course I want to help you and support you.
Right.
Why? Because I love you. Right? And I want to make you happy. I inherently want to meet your needs.
Yeah.
And so saying it like that is really helpful.
There's something that, because that is ideal, right? But if one of the two people are suffering from trauma, then it could escalate.
Yes.
And that situation might not be possible. I heard you define trauma, and I was kind of blown away by it because that word seems so extravagant and big. And the way you described it was so simple. Can you describe it to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times when I think of trauma, I think of an unmet need or want that exists and lives within our system. And then so often what happens is, right, that we work hard to almost recreate those systems or to recreate those old situations subconsciously, not consciously, but in a hope of eventually getting that want or need met. The body works in such a way, and this is all about pregnancy and postpartum, so we can use, an example that may not be glorified, but it's effective, right?
Yeah.
If we think about, let's say, how do we know when we need to use the restroom, right? Again, not a pretty example, but, well, the body gives us a physical sensation that says, hey, by the way, you've got an outstanding need here. And maybe we're on our way to go to the restroom, and then one of our many kiddos says, oh, mama, I need you, right? And it'll be like, 1 second, body, and I'm going to go and I'm going to take care of it. And then usually what happens is that urge, it subsides or it's out of our conscious awareness. And then we get busy doing some other things, right? And then a little bit while later, our body's going to remind us again and be like, hey, by the way, still here. You haven't gone to the restroom yet, right? And we'll be like, oh yeah, let's go. And then our husband calls and it's like, oh, sure, honey, I'm coming, right? Or then the doorbell or all of these things. And so what happens with that sensation? It's going to play this game of kind of going up and going down until we eventually meet that need. Yes, it will oftentimes build up with more intensity of like, you're not going to ignore me anymore.
Yeah.
Right? But once we meet that need, it goes away.
How do we, with tools, right? A lot of people don't have tools.
Right.
Because generationally, their parents didn't have the tools. And so it goes down the line. How do people, I know that there's a lot of resources today where they can access the tools, but how do people access the tools to be able to understand ways in healing their own trauma?
And so trauma is one that's really hard, the question that was asked recently, someone asked me was, well, how do I know if there's still something from that old trauma that's lingering? How do I know if I digested or processed it or not? And I'll use the example a lot of times of a bruise, right? Let's say I'm not always the most graceful, like to walk into a lot of doors. Let's say, I bruised my arm. In the moment, it's going to hurt like a beast and it's going to throb. Right? And like trauma, right? When it first happens, it's really painful. And then usually with a little bit of time and space, I forget that it's there. And I could go about doing, you know, my daily routine. And as long as nothing touches it, like I'm good. But then if someone should brush into it or poke it, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that really hurts. I forgot that was there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, first it's like, how do we know if something that happened is fully digested or still lingering?
Yes.
And a lot of times I like to think about it like that bruise, right?
It keeps coming up.
Yeah. Does it keep coming up? When it gets triggered or when we talk about it, are we reliving the emotions and the sensations as if it was happening right now?
Yeah.
Versus oh yeah, that happened. It was really hard, but I dealt with it. And, you know, it was a really hard moment. But not only did I deal with it, there's also that capacity to see like the good.
Yeah.
Like that was terrible, but there was this one kind person. And you know what? I so remember her voice and those words were huge. So first, it's even being able to differentiate like what still is in need and what has digested through a lot of different things. You know, there are definitely two research proven approaches to healing trauma from a professional perspective. And EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, is Francine Shapiro's approach. SE, or somatic experiencing, is Peter Levine's approach. And both of them come at these unmet needs or wants, or even how I like to also think about it is an unfinished sympathetic response. Yeah. Right? I started to fight, I started to run, but I didn't make it to safety. So that adrenaline is still inside because it didn't make it all the way, right? So that unfinished piece, right? Another way of thinking about it. And it's really bringing the body into the equation and helping to figure out where we're holding things inside and allowing our body to be that roadmap of what still needs time and attention. Yeah. You know, to do it kind of like you said, what can we do on our own? Talking. Yeah. Support. Yeah. And not all talk is created equal. There's a difference between talk that is helpful and therapeutic. For sure. And then there's a difference between the talk that kind of re-traumatizes. Support, reaching out to other people who have been there and have walked there and who understand. Yeah. I'm a big believer that, you know, I don't think it'll be enough for trauma once it hits that threshold. Yeah. But I am a big believer that anything that we do to take care of our physical self will inform our emotional self. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to get into postpartum. Sure. So I recently heard a story about a friend reached out asking for help. A friend of a friend had postnatal psychosis, which is something I've never actually heard about before. And so I kind of did some research and asked a few friends. And one of my really good friends was like, oh yeah, I knew a woman that had it. And I was helping her at her house. And then things started getting a little serious. And my husband asked me not to go and help her anymore because he was concerned for my safety. And this friend, so she was like, I helped from afar. And this friend went on medication and ended up having, you know, a totally great experience and having a great life. During the time she was suffering from psychosis, she was saying that the water bubbles in the fish tank were telling her to kill her family. Yeah. And if you think about it, this is like a totally normal, sane person that postpartum is chemically imbalanced and is saying that the bubbles in the fish tank are telling her to kill her family. Yeah. So if you think about it, it's like, we need to talk about this. Sure. First of all, like I really want to talk about this because that's scary. Yeah. And it's scary. I just always think about what if I went through that? I don't think I would tell anyone if I was having those feelings because I would feel so ashamed and guilty. And how would that impact my family? Right. And how would that impact me? And I really want to understand more about psychosis. Yeah. And it's really hard. Gratefully, psychosis is not a common experience. And I want us to talk about that, right? Like even in that short period of time. But is it not common because it's not spoken about? So, you know, there is definitely that concern. Like, are women just dealing with it from home? I don't believe so, because psychosis is definitely a life-threatening emergency. Psychosis is definitely something that requires intervention immediate. Like there's nothing to talk about. We could, to answer that question, maybe we can even look at it from the perspective of when we look at, our current rates, right? Our known rates of different, what we call perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So the different constellation of potential illnesses that can happen in that perinatal period. Yeah. Whereas let's say depression is more like 15%, and anxiety postpartum is closer to 10%, psychosis is 0.1 to 0.2%. Yeah. And so gratefully, I think why you probably hadn't heard about it until then is because it really is, not that common. But it's massive, right? In terms of intervening, yes, and critically paying attention. Psychosis in general, when we talk about psychosis, we're talking about a break from reality, losing touch from reality, a lot of confusion in our mental processes, and, a lot of the common ways that we'll see that break from reality is hallucinations or delusions. Either, seeing things or hearing things that are not really there, right? That's hallucinations, whether, visual or auditory. And then delusions are beliefs, right? Unfounded beliefs. Yeah. And like, the belief that this fish is giving me a command, or the bubble is giving me a command of what to do, in terms of my family and things like that. And it's devastating to see. It's devastating to see at any point, but especially in that postpartum period. Yes. And again, it is something that is immediate. It is a crisis. It needs to be addressed straight away. Yeah. But gratefully,
and
it
there
can
is,
be.
Right.
Yes.
There is treatment. So if you're having feelings of delusion, you should immediately seek help, and there is medication that can support you through this. And you can come out on the other side.
Absolutely. Medication, hospitalization. I like to say any thoughts that you're having of wanting to harm yourself or other, or baby, we want you to reach out. We want to reach out and to look into it. It's not always going to be psychosis. There is some overlap in those thoughts with postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder.
Let's talk about that.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. What is a postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder?
And interestingly enough, it's the thing that I'm seeing most often in my practice of late. And, from a statistical perspective, as far as we know right now, it's 3 to 5%. Do we think that those numbers are going to change? And as we increase, that permission and that conversation around this, will we learn more, and will that be different? I believe so, right? OCD has two main components. We have the obsession piece, which is the cognitive piece, and then we have the compulsion piece, which is some kind of behavior that we want to do to alleviate the anxiety, right? So an obsession. Well, everyone here in this room at some point has had an intrusive thought, right? A thought that just seemingly comes out of nowhere, seemingly has no connection, right? We've all sat on the plane at one point and been like, gosh, what would happen if that hatch just opened? And you're like, ooh, that was weird. And then we go back to watching whatever we were watching. Sometimes we look, did anyone notice that I had that thought? But for the most part, we move on. Yeah. That was weird. It happened. And what's for dinner, right? What's next? With anxiety, with OCD, it's like that thought gets gum stuck to the other side, and I can't quite shake it. And so I have that thought, and it repeats over and over again, and it builds. And the more it's building and the more I'm cycling or ruminating with it, the more my anxiety is increasing. And usually when someone struggles, with OCD, there'll be some kind of compensatory behavior, some kind of effort to calm that, right? So let's say I'm on that plane, and let's say I'm worried about the hatch, and it's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Right? Maybe, I hope that you're not going to be the one to check it yourself, but maybe I'm going to call over, the stewardess, and I'm going to be like, hey, by the way, is the hatch secure? Can you check it for me? Right? And that reassurance can be enough to calm that obsessive thought and to put it down for the moment, right? If I was home and the concern was not about the hatch on a plane, but a lock on the door, I might get up and I might get up and check. And, over and over again. And it reaches that threshold of disorder when this cycle, right, of thoughts and actions to address it becomes so intense. I mean, there's a number of other criteria, but one of the main things is that I'm no longer able to function. It's interfering with my ability to function, right? I can't hold down a job or get through what I need to do in the day because I'm checking that door 35 times.
Yeah, right.
So when we talk about, in the postpartum period, two of the most common intrusive thoughts that we'll see with OCD, one is a fear of dropping the baby, right? And then the other one is a fear of harming the baby or cutting a baby with a knife. What if I'm in the kitchen and I'm just making a salad and I'm holding the baby and the knife slips and I accidentally cut the baby, right? So there's that potential harm thought or concern. But the difference of, what happens with OCD, different than, let's say, a psychosis, is mom is usually intensely bothered by that thought. Oh my gosh, why did I have that thought? Oh my gosh, what if? And they will engage those compensatory behaviors or those things that we're going to do. They're going to take great actions to prevent that from ever coming to fruition typically. If I'm worried about cutting a baby with a knife because I was in the kitchen, if I throw out all the knives, no problem.
Right.
If I'm worried about dropping the baby, God forbid, I'm not going to go to a mall or a place that has, maybe like a skyrise parking lot, or I'm going to make up excuses of why someone else always has to bring the baby up and down the stairs.
Interesting. And these are the two most common.
Most common. There's lots of different ones, lots of different iterations of that.
Yeah. That is so interesting to me. And so OCD, prenatal OCD, prenatal psychosis. What are other things to look out for prenatal?
So depression. Right? Depression is the one that I think was most talked about, you know, and historically the thought was that's all, right? Oh, postpartum depression. And it still is. It's about, 15%. Although, like I said, I'm seeing it, move more towards anxiety than to depression.
Yeah.
And depression, it's a lot of changes in appetite. We always want to be weary of the mom that seemingly dropped all of her pregnancy weight overnight. I know it sounds like the dream, but anything that's happening too quickly, we're concerned. Right? Changes in sleep. One of the, questions that we'll use a lot of times to be able to identify what's going on is, if we were to say to a mom, let's say, here's a cozy, calm, serene, hotel type room, and don't worry, baby's going to be completely taken care of and nurtured, would mom be able to fall asleep? So we see a lot of changes in appetite, changes in sleep habits. Usually it's an inability to fall asleep, but for some it could be, intense, more sleeping. Sometimes it's, apathy, not wanting to do things that they used to do, disturbance in bonding with baby. Fogginess can happen, a lot of different things like that.
Yeah. And what is used, like if a woman is feeling like she has postnatal depression, what are the steps for her to take in that situation?
And if it is postnatal depression, it requires professional help.
And medication.
So it doesn't have to require medication. Medication is a wonderful tool in the box. But many, both women or men or birthing and non-birthing partners can successfully, treat it with therapy. So it depends on a lot of different factors.
Yeah.
But I want us to also differentiate, first of all, what is postpartum?
Yeah.
Right? What is baby blues? And then the postpartum depression, right? Because first of all, postpartum is just a time period. And we walk around and we'll say like, oh, she's so postpartum. And it has a very specific connotation. But the reality is that anyone who's ever had a baby is postpartum.
Yeah, that's the way I identify. Yeah.
Good. And that's great. Right. So, postpartum is a time period. Any woman who's ever had a baby is in that postpartum period. And when we acknowledge that it's normal and it's natural and it applies to everyone, it also just reclaims that space to embark on that journey at your own time and at your own pace with no expectations.
Yeah.
The baby blues is something that usually kicks in within 2 to 3 days after birth and can last up to 2 to 3 weeks. And it's something that upward of 85% of women experience. And I am a big proponent that anything that 80 to 85% of a population is experiencing is normal.
Yeah.
Right? So we might have seen it before as pathological. We now know that it's normal. There's so much change and upheaval. And, we could talk about it more at another time, but it's that awareness that usually for baby blues, it doesn't require professional help. And so things that we can do at home and talking and massage and, making sure we're eating good food and getting out and communing with Mother Nature. Yeah. All of those things can make a really big difference in that early baby blue place.
Yeah.
And then postpartum depression or postnatal depression is different. It is something that is a clinical illness and does require professional help.
Right.
And so a lot of times it's partners that'll recognize it first, but, it's a family concern. And so when we can approach it as a family and reach out for help as a family, it's wonderful because it is completely treatable.
And it's so interesting because I think in Eastern culture more, there is something called the fourth trimester.
Oh, yes.
And why we're not addressing that in Western culture. It's like they just give you the baby and you go home and this is, for me, the fourth trimester is the most important part of the whole
massive
journey.
Yeah.
It should have 10 times more focus than the pregnancy.
Yeah.
I had a Ayurvedic postpartum doula, and they really support you in the home. They cook foods for you that really support your healing. There's also the binding. We offer a support. It's a support waist trainer. So it's not like a classic snapback culture. It's really to you're like jelly after birth.
Yes.
So it's really to give you support while breastfeeding in the middle of the night when you're exhausted.
Yeah.
It's to help your organs move into place. It's to really give you a superpower. It's a support system. And, a doula postpartum, which a lot of people don't even really acknowledge, is, I think, where all of your money should be spent on.
Massive. Yes.
It's the most important time. And also, so you have this Afterbirth program, which is, when you give birth to a child, you have this other entity. Yeah. So it's a rebirth, right? Totally. It's a rebirth for mom and dad. So can we talk about the rebirth a little bit?
Totally. And it's so brilliant. The analogy I'll use all the time, right, is the difference between planning for the wedding day and preparing for a marriage. Right? If I put all my eggs in my basket about the wedding day, but I've given no thought to the marriage, I have some rocky road ahead of me, right? Because marriage is hard. And it's the same thing, right? And so that's actually what was the inspiration for the name of the workshop, which is most people will make a birth plan, but no one really thinks about an afterbirth plan. And like you said, birth, no matter how intense or long, there will be that precipitous moment and that day when the baby is born. And then it's the journey of parenthood. And yes, every birth of a baby is a rebirth of an individual as they take on this role for the first time, the second time, the eighth time of becoming a parent.
Absolutely. And it's like the birth plan almost is less relevant because it never goes to plan. I mean, well, it does actually. It really does. But sometimes it doesn't. But the afterbirth plan is it's like when you have a company or schools or you're doing things, you have to have meetings about stuff all the time. You should have a conference about the afterbirth plan. Yes. You should be doing classes like what you offer. You should be really structuring it and organizing it so it's actually working for you.
And we want you to do it during pregnancy. I don't want you to wait until postpartum. That's it. Be prepared, right?
For sure. Be proactive, not reactive. Yeah. That is really the foundation of what we're talking about.
I love that.
And so you offer the afterbirth plan. What other resources do you offer? Where can we find you? Where can our community find you?
You're so sweet. So, in the age post-COVID, I work a tremendous amount virtually. And so you can find me online at www.drberlin.com. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Alyssa D. Berlin. You can find me on Elliot's new Roku channel. He started Informed Pregnancy Plus and the workshop is there.
Yes.
And I want anyone to, everyone to feel free to reach out and to not hesitate if you have a question, if you're in need of a resource. I'm a big believer that I am very honored that I get to be a part of this journey with so many people. And so reach out for anything. And I'm always happy.
We're here to serve, right?
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've also listened to a bunch of podcasts you've done. So that's also a really good resource.
Yes.
If you just search for Dr. Alyssa Berlin, you can find podcasts that you've already done as well. Besides
starting with this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then so at the end of every episode, we love to ask you for some words of wisdom for the village, something valuable that you think would really assist them on their journey. It could be unrelated or related to pregnancy and birth.
And those words of wisdom, right? They're so hard because you just want them to be special and to be meaningful. And I feel like if I were to really slow down in terms of where I am in this time and in this space, it's really about, patience and grace and just, being kind to yourself, really treating yourself the way you would treat other people with the same benefit of the doubt, with the same kindness, with the same full heart, and to not give it all away and to save some for yourself. Because it just, the more we can feed ourselves, the more we have to offer.
Absolutely. Especially as mothers.
Especially as moms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That was very multifaceted. There was a lot in that piece of wisdom. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. I mean, it is such a tremendous just need. And I'm just excited to see everything that gets to come from this incredible village that you've created.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Village podcast, normalizing conversations and experiences in pregnancy, childbirth, postpartum, and motherhood. We are here to serve, and we really want to hear from you. So feel free to share, comment, like, and subscribe to keep this village growing. We are eternally grateful for you being with us and sharing space today.